Thank you for joining this session. I've got about 30 minutes to talk about strategy and really want to talk about why we need to think about strategy and how to think about strategy in this uncertain world. Because a lot of times when people think about strategy, they think about very kind of deliberate and deep thinking to get to strategy about running an organization. But that's not really possible. That's not the world we're in right now. And so I want to leave you with something that you can do. So this is, equal parts inspiration and a little bit of teaching at the end, or at least a little bit of giving you something that's actionable right now in terms of strategy. So a little bit about me. For those of you who don't know me, I'm an engineer by training, spent a number of years in the engineering world. Along the way, kind of morphed into more of a strategy role in marketing and entrepreneur. So in terms of retail, I spent a couple of years at Starbucks in the mid 90s. So back in the early days of that organization. I spent some time at AT&T Wireless with retail planning and performance, and headed up retail innovation at Blockbuster, and have consulted, over the years with a number of retail companies. Most recently was working in private equity, where we had a few retailers in the portfolio. So, and in between, I spent a number of years working in New York for innovation and strategy consultancies. So, again, for those of you who know me, I tend to speak fast. I've got quite a bit of material to cover. So that may well be the case today, but I hope you'll bear with me. Hope you'll get something valuable out of this. And then, at the end, you see my contact information on this slide. Hopefully at the end, if you've got any questions and we don't have time, I'll give you my contact information again. So you can always track me down and find me. So I want to start with this point that, we're going to talk a bit about strategy in this, kind of turbulent and dynamic world, but even in a good situation, in good times, organizations struggle with strategy, right? And I've spent the better part of the last 5 or 10 years focused on trying to help companies with strategy, from big firms to big brands to small firms. And it can come across as a pretty weighty topic. It can come across with these big frameworks. We're talking about SWOT and, blue ocean strategy. And all that's important work, but it's also oftentimes really, really hard work when organizations are so busy, when they've got these immediate priorities that need to be done. And also, in steady state times, or, the world we knew up until a few weeks ago, it was very difficult to change. And oftentimes, these strategy initiatives make organizations flirt with change. And so, a lot of organizations struggle with strategy. And even those that have strategy, that are good at it, often the focus is, really predominantly the focus has been on more. There have been some organizations that are exception to this, that have a more balanced approach to strategy, but by and large, the predominant strategic construct before this pandemic was around this idea of more, right? How do we drive more sales? How do we get more growth? How do we attract more financing? As a retailer, it's more doors, more traffic, more inventory turns, more loyalty, and the list goes on. But, that was the normal mode for building a strategy up until, we've kind of gotten things turned on our heads. And so I'll come back to this point in a moment. But, it goes without saying, and this is probably the understatement of the week, and, obviously everybody else has talked about this as well, but at this moment in time, we're dealing with this monumental uncertainty, right? And everybody, whether they're, on the right side of preparation or the wrong side, whether their business is down or they're, they can't meet demand, everybody's navigating a crisis of some magnitude. And we've heard a number of really cool stories over the week about brands like Louis Vuitton and Tito's Vodka down here in Austin, that have pivoted to make hand sanitizer, right? Use their production line, use their distribution, use their brand. And those are great stories and great examples where you hear about McDonald's offering coffee to first responders and emergency folks. Great example as well of doing something where it's, they're meeting a need of their customers. But that doesn't necessarily provide a template for what's right for you, right? And we can't all be pursuing those same strategies. The key fundamental question comes down to this, right? What are you going to do with all of the circumstances you're dealing with? And that's where I want to talk a little bit about some of the changes we're seeing, how it impacts how you think about strategy. And again, land on an approach you can take to strategy that's as simple as 7 flip charts and some flip chart markers, right? So coming back to this, I want to talk a little bit about what, the world we're going through, right? And offer some insight here and how it impacts how we think about strategy. And there's one side of it, it says, look, as business people, right? What's going on in the world we live in, and specifically as retailers, right? And for the most part, with few exceptions, we've lost sales, or we've certainly shifted the mix of business in ways we never anticipated. For a lot of us who've had to close doors in some or all of our locations, we've lost traffic. So many stories, especially in service industries and hospitality, of letting employees go, long-standing employees, firms that are struggling to renegotiate fixed costs, whether it's rent, whether it's debt. Many organizations, you see this in, food service and microbrewing and beer, who've got captive inventory with a short shelf life that they can't sell. And it's putting a lot of their capital at risk. And massively disruptive supply chains where people that we did business with for years that were our key partners may or may not be, in the same business and in the same form that they were before we stepped into history as we have the last week. And we're facing uncertain delays for anything non-essential, whether it's a product launch, whether it's a system integration, whether it's, hiring, and most high performance organizations aren't used to the type of delays, we're seeing. And so, this list also goes on, but this is some snapshot of what we're dealing with as suppliers. But it's equally important to think about it on the other side, right? Every one of us, no matter what business we're in, serves somebody. And, if we think about what world they're in and what's going on for them, almost universally, we've got some concern about losing loved ones. Some of us already have, tragically. There's considerable anxiety about losing jobs, losing income. There's anxiety about financial security. We might have had money squirreled away and saved in portfolios that don't look like they did at the end of February or, the beginning of the year. Our sense of mobility as consumers has been, fundamentally altered. We had a sense of independence coming into this, honed over a lifetime, but the sense of mobility is radically reduced, and where we can go and why we can go, we don't have control of right now. I like to think of it this way, that, as professionals, we might have an operating radius that spanned the whole country, right? I would get in planes and go to Seattle or New York, as probably many of you have, or even across the ocean. Right. And that was, our operating radius was hundreds or thousands of miles. And now within a short period of time, it's reduced to city blocks or neighborhoods, and that's again, a change most of us have never seen in our lifetime. And this is not true for me, but many of us are cooped up with people, we may not like, roommates or family that we've not had to spend so much time with. And under difficult circumstances, it can bring out, some challenging times. And so, what you see is things that were so fundamental to our lives as retailers, as professionals, as people, but especially as on the professional side of our life, weeks ago, like comparable store sales was a metric we lived and died by, right? Loyalty metrics, traffic count. I've not heard anybody speak about these things in the last several weeks, right? They've just, they don't mean much at this moment. Now they will, they've not gone away, but the way we think about, just operating the business has changed. And this, when I talked earlier about strategies based on more, really here's the biggest impact on where that's left us, is the idea or even appearance of trying to get more for us has screeched to a halt in the foreseeable future. And this is a fundamentally jarring change because we've got a whole generation of people that are business leaders and business owners for whom this was the rule of the game. This was the name of the game, was growth, and was whatever we did last year, let's do 7% more, 8% more. This will change, this will come back, but we don't know how. And so even those companies that had strategies around more growth and more doors and more loyalty are in a situation where it needs a reset, right? And, I was talking to my wife this week. I got an email from a car company that we own a car from, and they sent out this, we're there for you. We're there for first responders. We want to offer you a discount on a new car. And I thought, wow, just how tone deaf that is, because it comes across as saying, we're there for you, but we want to sell you this car. And it just seems like, I don't know how many of you would react the same way, but it's just not the right time for that kind of message. What more is turned into in a flash is this idea of more for them, right? And whether it's our employees, whether it's our customers, whether it's patients, if we're in healthcare, whether it's healthcare providers, how do we deliver more empathy? How do we deliver more resilience, more understanding, more patience and more help? And as a strategist who's worked with a lot of companies across a lot of industries, what I would describe these as are latent skills. And that's probably a very kind way of saying that most businesses weren't practicing these type of skills at the degree they need to now to navigate probably the next 6 months. And so that's a challenge. I think there's a lot of us, myself included, who would argue that's an incredible opportunity and a silver lining. But it's also a challenge because these are not the way, again, most of us kind of grew up in business. And so I think none of us ask for this, right? There were probably a very small number of people who saw it coming. They were trying to warn us about it, but most organizations aren't prepared for it. They don't have months of cash on hand, let alone days. And we don't know how long it'll last, right? There's a lot of unknowns. We don't know what will be changed forever. We had a really interesting conversation at lunch today with some of the audience members and participants to say, look, will our norms around intimacy, will our norms around what home means, will our norms around, purchasing behavior? I mean, what an amazing time to be a behavioral psychologist right now to understand and guess how these things will change. But most of us who don't know, and we'd only guess. We don't even know what normal is going to look like 2 weeks from now. So what that brings me to in this uncertain world is what I've always called and will continue to call the first law of strategy, right? And this is something, if you want to think about strategy, whether it's in dynamic times or more stable times, is a fundamental truism that we really have to believe if we're going to take action. And especially today, if we're going to take action where many organizations are paralyzed, many are vacillating. This isn't what we signed up for any of us, but no matter what the circumstances that befall us, we own the outcome, right? And I think we all get this intellectually, but it's really taking ownership of it that's critical, especially now, right? We didn't write this script. We didn't plan it this way, but we have choices to make. We can look at the situation, look at who we are, and make choices that are going to make a massive difference on our income, whether we come out, our outcome, whether we come out of this stronger or whether we come out of this, in a reduced capacity. What history has shown, and I just saw a list today of all the companies that were started in 2007, 2008, 2009, companies like Dropbox and Uber, and the list goes on, that organizations that think and act clearly in difficult times come out stronger, right? And those who can weather the storm aren't necessarily those who just work harder. In what I see, everybody's working harder right now. And not even those people that spend more. Not all of us have that luxury. But those who think better and make different choices are going to be the ones that come out stronger. So in a short-term crisis, we can take emergency measures. Everybody has probably done that already. But in a prolonged crisis, that doesn't work. When we're talking about months, when we're talking about weeks, months, whatever it's going to be. Until the dust settles, the question is, how can we be decisive? How can we be strategic? And I think I've got a perspective on that that's hopefully valuable to you at the end. Before I get there, I want to talk about four, what I'm calling, describing as tectonic forces. None of these are going to come as a surprise to you. Many of our speakers have alluded to them, but I think, these four have the most impact on how we think about strategy. So I wanted to kind of lump some of the insights into these buckets. And I'd also caveat by saying these are the four that have had the biggest impact so far, because it might change next week. The first one is, unlike any time, certainly in my lifetime, it is now more important as a brand, as a company, as a professional, to look human than it is to look perfect. And this is probably even true of us as individuals, right? We don't have the luxury to go to get our to the salon like we used to, right? We don't even have the luxury to go to the dry cleaners, people, right? So we got to just look as good as we can, but it's more important to look human. It's more important to look sincere and honest than to try to look posh and polished. As a society, we're embracing imperfection. We're bringing emotion into a business setting like I've never seen before. We're dealing with uncertainty, and it's just, as I said a moment ago, it's just not the time to look self-serving, and certainly not the time to be tone deaf. It's probably the biggest fail right now. And so the silver lining behind this one, I think, and I think a lot of people would argue, is that we no longer have to dehumanize. We no longer have to distort the truth. We have license and permission to call it what it is from a human perspective in terms of what we're dealing with. And personally, I hope this is one of the changes that comes out of this crisis and stays around and sticks around, because I think it can lead to a more conscious way of doing business, as a couple of our presenters described today. The second thing is the speed of change right now is insane, right? It's unprecedented that our attitudes change overnight. What we believe in terms of socially acceptable behavior. I've never in the United States seen someone walking around with a mask on. Now for a lot of practical reasons we do, and we're going to see more of it because it's now being recommended. But once you put that mask on and go out in public, just the way people behave has changed so radically from the way they would have probably weeks ago, let alone months ago. Corporate policies, shop hours. When I worked in the entertainment industry at Blockbuster, trying to get a studio to change its launch window from theatrical release to home video release would have taken an act of God or an act of Congress, or it would have just never happened. And it has happened. It's happened immediately where films that were intended to go to theatrical release are going to online release. our entire education system went from, mostly in person to online. As a society, we've looked at how to put $2 trillion into play. And, without wanting to get political, you could agree or disagree with some of the choices. My point is that the speed at which we took $2 trillion and put it into play, none of us, I think, would have ever expected. So, bringing it down to the level of what's happening in some brands and some trends. I love Google Trends. It's an amazing tool. If you haven't played with it and you have time, you can go and search any of your own terms and see what impact it's had. I've picked 4 here just that are illustrative. In retail, many of us will describe ourselves as boutiques. You look at how this term boutique has changed in the last month. And, within a year and a half, it had a pretty steady level of traffic, and it's dropped off a cliff in the last 4 weeks. People aren't thinking about boutiques when they're thinking about survival for the most part. Luxury brand Volvo. Volvo went from, again, very steady traffic to falling out. Who's thinking about buying a car, let alone kind of a luxury brand like Volvo? And so they still see service traffic, but their sales traffic is probably fundamentally dropped. People talk about fashion. You look at a brand like Spanx, right, who's carved out a great niche for themselves and a lot of momentum in their business. But in a world where we're sitting here on video conferencing and Zoom, maybe shapewear doesn't have the appeal that it once did. Again, likely to come back, but you look at what this has done to a business like Spanx, which has been on an upward trajectory for a while. And in virtual school, right? I mentioned education changing. Look at how quickly that's come up and starting to drop off, because maybe a lot of us are realizing, having our kids home all day is not there's a lot of pros and cons, let's just say, to that. So while we're speeding up, the third insight is we're also really in many ways being forced to slow down. And as proud, high performance organizations, we really were used to imposing our own timeline on the world around us and how quickly we could launch products, how quickly we could, make things change. And for many businesses, busy had become a primary strategy, but with delays and postponements, that's simply not the case anymore. And we've had to push the pause button on this expectation of uninterrupted growth. Again, I'd argue there's some positive that can come out of that, but it's a fundamental change, and it's giving us a chance to reevaluate urgency. And then finally, and I think the one that's the most relevant for strategy is we're seeing across so many different areas of our life, every day is becoming this real-time, real-world experiment. And I mentioned some examples of it. A lot of speakers have. The things we took for granted in the workplace and the classroom have been disrupted in a way in a very short period of time. And I remember, coming out of engineering into marketing, talking about prototyping and piloting and taking small bets, and that all seems so quaint and like a luxury now when we make fundamental wholesale changes based on our instinct and what we believe to be true. And we learn on the fly, and we've got this acceptance of low fidelity that we didn't have before that's allowing this to happen. So we are no longer dealing with the constraint of too much at stake, at least not right now, in order to make hard choices. That is as strong a silver lining as we're probably going to find in a very difficult set of situations, or circumstances. So back to this question I posed earlier, this kind of rhetorical question of how can we be strategic in this environment with all these challenges, with all this uncertainty, with this massive loss of everything. It would be so nice to follow the playbook, right? Get it out and follow, here's the 5 forces, here's what we do. But we're not in that world. And the other way to think about it is how can we not think about strategy, right? Because those who are simply reactive are likely to fall behind. They're not going to be making the difficult choices. If we're going to weather this, we have to rely on our thinking muscle, and we have to rely on a little bit of structure to help us get there, I believe. All of our situations are unique. All of our strengths, all of our challenges, all of our, staying power is unique. And so what that means when I talk about adaptive strategies is the idea of going from methodical thinking, kind of slow top-down strategy thinking, to what I'm calling mindful in motion. And to some strategists, some of my peers in the strategy world, this is sacrosanct, right? This is crazy talk. And it's changing fundamentally how strategy works. But I'll explain to you why I think this is the approach that works now. And I'd even argue that if you get good at this and can practice this, this is going to serve you in terms of how you think strategically, even as we come out the other side of this crisis. Fundamental core assumption behind it is we want to come out of this stronger, right? Stronger than we were, maybe. That'd be great. Stronger than others. But even maybe just stronger than we would have otherwise, when we're taking, these blows to our body like we have been, like we all have been, right? But that you don't want to fundamentally change everything you are at your core, because this is not the time to do that. That makes it much, much harder to survive and navigate this. So adaptive strategy relies on bucketing 2 things. And there'll be 3 areas around grounding ourselves and 4 areas I recommend around evaluating ourselves to make this really actionable. When you look at grounding ourselves, it's saying, okay, what is our foundation? And the very first day, I think the American Express conversation was great around this, is they're saying, look, Small Business Saturday and focusing on how we help businesses is who they are. That's core to their purpose and their promise and who they serve. They can't stray from that, but they absolutely can reevaluate what they're doing, like the tone, their actions, and their capabilities. So this is the core lens. But here it brings me to the second law of strategy, which is probably just as important as the first. And I can't tell you how many times I've gone into organizations where the strategy conversation starts like this, right? This is in normal times. It starts with, well, look, we have to grow more. We have to have more loyalty. We need to have our dealers do what we want them to do, right? If you're a power tool company, you have a dealer network. We want our dealers to do, we need them to do our program, comply to our strategy. And so that's what we need. This is what they have to do. And there's so many strategies, this framework, what we need, what they have to do. And I'll tell you, a winning strategy can't work that way because we can't control what they have to do. A winning strategy has to be built on, for the people we serve, what do they need, right? If we serve our dealers, what do they need to be the best possible partner for us? And then what do we have to do to provide that to them? That is a much more effective way to get the change that we need. And it's absolutely more timely than ever right now. And I'll talk about how to get there. But here's the thing, and this is kind of the big aha in looking at adaptive strategy, is as our timeline for uncertainty expands, which I don't think anybody would argue is happening. And then our timeline for decisions is collapsing, right? Uncertainty is months, timeline for decisions is days. Our instantaneous point of view on what they need, what we can do, essentially becomes your adaptive strategy, right? And this is a flip on how it's done, but this is your template. If there is such a thing as a template for strategy, this is it. And I think it even works after we kind of emerge. It puts who you serve at the center, and then it's very actionable around what you can do. So 4 steps, and I'll talk about kind of getting really, rolling up our sleeves. The first is just one time, revisit and reinforce your foundation. Do it with courage, do it collaboratively, but reinforce your foundation. 3 areas to do that. Maintain situational awareness. That's something you need to do very repeatedly. And then revise and update your point of view and act, right? So who we are, our footing, this is our foundation, our grounding is 3 things. Who we are, it can be what makes us unique, what we're exceptional at, what do we believe and what's our promise? And then who we serve. So who are they? That shouldn't change, right? What's important to them? And in a steady state way, what makes them fulfilled? Kind of what's at the core of their being? And then why we're here. So what's the change we're fighting for, the world would miss, and what role do we play? So don't feel like you've got to write this down. If you want, I'm happy to send you a copy of this. But in practice, this is what it could look like. Again, imagine you're a power tool retailer. You could say, look, we've been leading a leading hardware retailer for 50 years. We have this exceptional understanding of the trades, right? We know plumbers, we know electricians better than anybody. Our core, we believe a job isn't done if it isn't done right. Our customers believe that, we believe that. And we're humble, honest, and straight to the point, right? That's who we are. Any organization can get to this kind of statement about who they are. The second is who we serve. We serve craftsmen. This example serves craftsmen and weekend warriors who aspire to do a job right? They rely on their tools. They've got this strong sense of duty. And they're tougher than any challenge they face. And tough is a really critical thing right now. And the third piece is why we're here. Right? We're committed to this world that works better. Not only works better in a sense of it makes life better for everybody, it works better in a sense of the way we get toil done is better. And we provide this timeless, dependable set of tools for people who that work as long as hard as you do. So again, anybody can do this. It shouldn't take more than half a day. You can do it on a whiteboard. If you're in person, you can do it on Slack or Microsoft Teams. If you're remotely, you can do it with flip charts. Critical exercise. Then the second piece becomes situational awareness. How do we look at our customers and what's changing for them and causing them pain right now? Our reality, and capture that. Where we do business and what's going on in our channel, and then what it takes to deliver. Again, don't feel like you got to write this down fast. By way of example, if we look at our customers, they're going through where their jobs are postponed. They don't want to lose their crews. They physically need to keep working because that's how they identify with themselves. But they've got jobs, and there are jobs that are still going on, like for landscapers. Look at our reality, right? We can't operate all of our physical stores. We're not an essential business. Many of our employees are also in the trade, so they're suffering twice. But our online business is always small and nascent because we've always been this relationship-based business, and so we've never built out, say, a rental or loan business. The channel where we do business, we're trying to, those who are buying tools are buying them online. They've been forced to, even if they love us, that's their only outlet right now. Brands could be becoming less important. Inventory could be piling up, downward price pressure. I mean, you get the point, right? You can look at the channel. What we know is, many of our customers in this example want us to win, so we're still here for them later. And then look at what it takes to deliver, right? Historically, it's been infrastructure for physical stores. but we're going to probably need some new technology solutions if we're going to do business differently. We've got these strong relationships, but we might need new partners. All that can happen in your team to look at what you're grounding and what's your situational awareness, do it regularly, but it comes down to this. Again, here's your template for what anybody can do to think more strategically. Make a strong point of view, and it can be one sentence or two on what they need, what we can do. And it can be what we can do this week, what we can do this month. It could be what they'll notice, what they love, what they'll remember, what's relevant now. And then the flip chart, what we can do is be true to our foundation, obviously within our constraints, that moves us forward and keeps us meeting our goals. We can't blast to the world, we're trying to do more for us, but we got to do something and make choices that move us forward and then leverage our strengths. I'm not going to give you the answer for what this tool company can do, right? Because the point is not to do it's to encourage you to think through this yourselves and to say there is no playbook and there is no kind of cut and dry example. They could decide to pivot, or they could decide to prepare and hunker down. They could get into rental and loan and delivery, double down on physical or pivot to digital. They could look at creating their own version of the CCC and organized work parties, if you remember from the Great Depression. They could train new unemployed people in the trades. There's so many things that they can do, but it is not about hand sanitizer and it's not about coffee, right? It's explicitly specific to them. So finally, my last slide, and again, I promised I'd talk fast and I did, and I do. But this is what it takes to make it work, right? It's about really trusting yourself around insight and having dialogue. I had conversations with some of the participants earlier. Scott at We Are Bill hit this point pretty hard, but customers want to talk to you. They want to tell you what they need. Just do it in an unobtrusive way, and then let go of our normal lens to try to make it look the way we want it to look. The second is source ideas anywhere. We know creativity loves constraints. That's more true now than ever. But if you see great ideas, I'm saying don't just copy someone else's playbook, but look around for ideas up and down your team, from your associates, your executives, your team members, your peers. Anywhere you see ideas, grab them. And if it fits you, don't be shy. And then finally, instinct. We grew up in this, we've been growing into this data-driven world. Today, we don't have that luxury. We'll get back there, but now it's about instinct. It's the fastest way to process these inputs and this situational awareness. Because the world's more forgiving, it's the time to say, look, let's let go of the world fail and say, why not? And instinct is the fastest way to get there. So I'll end on that and see if there's any quick questions. And Piers, we may be running out of time. And anybody can send me an email at any time and ask me a question, but think calmly, think clearly. I've given you some steps that you can help think critically and take action. But that's really what I wanted to leave you with, is to say, it's not just important to think about strategy, but here's a way to think about strategy.
That's great.
Yeah, Piers, any
Thanks
questions?
so much, Tim. I'm sure we have a couple more minutes. It's very generous. There's a lot there. On Monday, when a few of us kind of open up our laptops and I can't fill it with Retail Innovation Week events and virtual talks, and we're like, okay, where do I start with what Tim recommended? I mean, what's my first step into this kind of
yeah, great question, Piers. I think, obviously it depends on what your work situation is, if you're remote or if you're together, but it's, whether you're doing this individually as a solopreneur or with a team, start with that idea of your foundation. And if you've already got it documented, go back and revisit it and find out, you can literally do this Monday morning. Just say, let's get really clear on who we are, who we serve, and why we're here, and post those so anybody can see those. Again, if it's on the wall, if it's on Slack, but that's step one. And then the second is we're getting all this input that's coming into our inbox, into our news feed. Start to parse it out into those 4 areas. And if it relates to what's changing for our customers, what's changing for our business, it relates to the market and the channel where we do business, or relates to capabilities, start parsing those out. But as a team, ask yourself this question of what do they need and what can we do? And it's going to lead you to that clarity. And look, by saying this is adaptive and dynamic, your perspective on that may change every week, and that's okay. But as long as it keeps moving you forward, you're not stuck trying to spend an enormous amount of time getting to a strategy, but you're getting to a point of view that's well thought out and clear, and you can keep updating, because you've never had an opportunity like this to put your neck out there and try something. And as long as it's coming across as authentic and helpful, your customers will love you for it, and they'll give you credit for it.
That's great. I see this question from Kimberly. Will this approach work for both corporations and entrepreneurs?
Yeah, great question, Kimberly, and absolutely. And I think it works, again, whether you're solopreneur or entrepreneur or big company. I mean, you can do this with a department, you can do this as an executive team. these same questions count, again, whether you're starting your own business in a small, you're opening a doggy daycare in one town, or whether you're a group of vets that cover, 20 cities. The same type of questions matter. And so, whatever your scope is within, that matters for you within your business, you can take this approach. So I've seen it work with, I've coached people that are doing it individually, and I've worked with larger teams, automotive companies that do something similar to this. So yes, I think it certainly can. The way you go about it is different. For small companies, the questions may be about timing and just, wherewithal. For large companies, it might be more about tone, and it might be more about, fixed costs. So what you're having in those conversations will differ, but the process and approach should still work.
Wonderful. That's great. I think we're going to bring it to close. I think lots of people are asking for how they're going to get hold of this deck or get more information.
So, and Piers, I don't know how you're distributing them. I'd be happy to, if anybody sends me an email at tim@strategyaustin.com, send your copy of it. Tim Sutton, again, that's more a photography site than a strategy site. So what you'll see there are the images throughout these slides. I've used all my own images to kind of give it a personal feel. Or reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Okay.
Excellent. But Piers, thank you again for a chance to have this conversation, and again, hopefully just provide everyone with a place to start for what they can do that's unique to their circumstances.